Hello, this video will explain how to set up and maintain your resources files in SCIMS quoting, and also discuss how the resources might be used in your quotes. Apart from the skills the estimator brings to the quoting process on how to do the work, the resource file is the next most critical segment of the quoting process, and the time you spend on setting it up properly and in maintaining it will be more than repaid in helping you to quote faster and more accurately. The resource file supplied with the software is only a sample file, built up from items used by a variety of civil contractors already using the system, and is included without rates to give you an idea of the type of resources you may need to create. The resource file can be accessed from a number of places within the software, but the simplest is from the main menu. A resource is simply an item with a cost that you can use to complete the work outlined in the quote. It can be a bag of cement, an hour of excavator time, a day's labour, subcontract price, etc. The resources are broken into expense groups to make them easier to manage and also to assist in applying profit margins. The expense groups are materials, your own employees' labour, your own plant, subcontract items, overheads, subcontract plant, subcontract labour and hired plant. When resources are used in the quote, they maintain their expense attribute, so you could, for example, mark up your own labour by 20% and subcontract labour by 15%. Each expense type can have its own individual profit margin if required. You can also ignore the expense types in terms of margins and apply a flat percentage across every item. When creating any resource, it's critical that the value of each item represents its cost to you without any profit margin, and with the exception of your own labour and plant, without overhead recovery. It's usual to value your own labour and plant at rates that include overhead recovery, as it's too complex to use actual costs and then try and add on overhead recovery as you go during the quoting process. The overhead resource type is mainly to cover job-specific overheads such as finance costs or special insurances, etc., that may occur on specific types of work. Using actual costs for resources allows you to know the true cost of the work you will undertake and allows you to budget against an accurate figure as the work progresses. The structure of a resource is to have a code, a description, a unit of measure, a rate, expense type, and some further classifications. The resources can be classified into ranges, materials, and type. These are just convenient labels for three separate grouping methods, and you can use them as you see fit. They are provided to assist you in the selection of resources and are not used to apply margins. If we select an item and bring it up for alter, you can see some examples of the product range. You could use the range group to classify resources by the work type, such as demolition, drainage or asphalting. This means that when you're quoting on a demolition job, you could quickly see all the resources used in demolition. This may work for you, but the drawback is that it doesn't help for items that are used in more than one type of work, so you may want to use this classification and grouping in a different way. You can use the materials type to classify resources by the material they're made from or the raw materials involved. So you'd create classifications for concrete, steel, crushed rock, etc. You could use the type group to classify resources by types such as excavator, truck, PVC pipe, etc. Don't worry too much about these grouping features and only use them if they will help you in your particular circumstances. You could ignore them and leave them all blank. However, if you start using them, remember that they are global attributes. So if you have a number of resources attached to a range described as drainage, and you change the description to pipe laying, all those resources will then belong to the pipe laying range group. Each resource has a unit of measure, and while units like square metres and cubic metres are self-explanatory, it's worthwhile thinking about time-based units of measure before you create your resources, so you can standardise them to suit your work and client base. You could create a labour resource for a site foreman with a unit of measure of hours, days, weeks or even a month, and in fact you may find it convenient to create a number of foreman resources to cover each unit of measure. but you need to consider it in relation to your other labour resources and the type of work you normally do. If your jobs normally last a few days or weeks, then it's probably better to set up all your labour resources measured in hours rather than some in hours and some in days and some in weeks. This means that you can assign all the labour to the quotes as hours worked rather than have 40 hours of a labourer, and if the foreman's time is measured in weeks and you only need 20 hours of supervision for a job, then you'd put him in as 0.5 of a week rather than 20 hours. The units of measure are under your control, and you can adjust the list as you can adjust all the lists in the quoting software by clicking on this icon and adding new items to the list. Be aware that if you change one of these, then every resource that's attached to it will also have its unit of measure changed. As I've said before, a resource can be almost anything, and one of the things that you could use it for is to create rates. This can be quite handy for quick estimating, but consider whether it's the best approach before using them. If you created a resource to lay 300mm polypipe as a rate per metre, all you have is a dollar value with no backup information as to how you arrived at the rate, what equipment you used, what the daily production rate was, and how appropriate it is to use that rate in any future quotes. An alternative would be to create an estimate item within the quote to lay the pipe, where you could detail the resources required to lay the pipe for this job, and then perhaps pick that estimate item up in the next job and modify it to suit. This process makes it easy to review quotes done by other people. Subcontract resources fall into three groups. Subcontract fixed prices to perform a specific task, i.e. traffic management, site survey, or in the case of this example, AC pipe removal. Subcontract labour rates, such as concrete cutting, where you establish a rate per metre or you engage a subcontract operator to use your plant on an hourly or daily basis. And subcontract plant rates, where you'd establish a rate per day or per hour for a subcontractor to perform given tasks using his own plant to your directions. You can set up subcontract rates with zero rates or average rates, so that when you bring them into the estimate, you can then reprice them to suit. The remaining expense types are fairly self-explanatory, and you'll become familiar with their application as you use them in your quotes. It's important to keep the prices reasonably up to date in the resource file, but in practice you'll be adjusting the rates within each quote to suit current prices. At the time you insert resources into a quote, such as materials or subcontract, and you're not sure of the price, it's best to tag that item as a review item, so that you know you need to check the price before issuing the quote. And the software will prompt you with warnings if you try and print a quote and items are marked for review. The best way to proceed now is to go through the sample resource file, delete any unwanted items, and price those that are relevant to you, and add any missing resources. Thank you for listening.